the kids, right now that we're not able to get on stage, they're not able to even move in a studio. But what you're really talking about is finding the dance within. You're talking about an inquiry where you're engaging so much of your inner self with the outer self of what we're learning with the technique. So how are you advising your students in this moment while they're not able to have their shows and explore that?
So largely what I give is completely what I give to people that I work with who are familiar with me. I don't do this in a large setting. I don't do this in a master class because a lot of it is about self-touch. And so it's all of these contact things to where in physical therapy you call closed chain events. Because if you're in an open chain event, in other words, you're free fall and you're moving, but you're moving in space, in negative space. You're moving all the distal points into negative space. But the minute you put something in your hand or something on your feet, or you're dropping your attention to different points in the body, and you're literally responsible for that point of contact, the brain is organizing, the nervous system is organizing from a sensory place that feeds the brain and the nervous system much more quickly and more efficiently. So actually to take something, an object, and attempt to do your class with that object, like rotation discs or like anything in your palm. I have people take soaps in their hands. I go, get a hotel soap, here we go. But basically, to make contact, and also since we're doing the frontal plane all the time, and we're all face forward, develop work where people are going to do the same exercise and move backwards around themselves simultaneously. So we want to be spherical, we want to be cylindrical, we want to develop movement from the heart. I have very, very specifically a heart exercise that I think is, I usually gave this reverence in real live studio classes, but I'm giving them as part, they're woven into the exercises because we leave out the back body, what I call the back body. So anything, if you would divide yourself in half like front and back, anything that is about the sides of the body, the underbelly and the inseam of the body comes into play. So it's like we're being eviscerated and moving backwards. So all of that is worked into the steps, into the exercise, into the warm-up. My people are used to this. This is normal. This is square one. So the language is already set in play, and there's no crusade here to explain or defend it. There is no defense. There's no need to explain this because it's understood that there is no other place of no other pointed departure, because the other is a reasonable facsimile of dancing or exercise that is not the same as dancing. Appropriated behavior is not dancing. Dancing for reasons other than being in contact with yourself and then finding your own generosity that leads to grace. So there has to be this somehow point of contact from inside that has elements of gratitude. So it's a connection to the heart, and then a connection to the core, which is between the belly button and the pelvic floor, and then to the floor. So this kind of ground up, non-hierarchical way of being in relationship is really, really critical. And now this sounds woo-woo, and it's not at all. It's entirely physical. It's a physical way of making contact with yourself. The only thing is, which is not the only thing for people that I know, is a willingness to relieve yourself of those ways of learning that are extrinsic. There's intrinsic and there's extrinsic. So you have to be willing to open up to coming to terms with the way that you've been learning might be obsolete. And the conversations that you've been having might be only partial and in fact counter to the learning process and to the growing process. And that conversation, that the questions being asked might actually be obsolete. And the direction you've been pointing might absolutely be pointless. I'm not saying I'm right. I'm just saying that's the only thing that interests me.
Steph, first of all, that's amazing. So for people who are listening to this, who say,
Yes.
well, how can I apply that? Like, is there a way to just explain, let's say, a basic first position and a basic tendu? Like, what would be something that how you might explain it?
Okay. I would go back to some material that Gelsey talks about a lot, which is that turnout is really this kind of vulnerability and taking the inside of your body. It's like, I call it eviscerating. It's like you take your underbelly and you turn your underbelly forward. So in fact, I even say that with adults when they come into the room and they're not dancers. I say, you have created, this is amazing. You're so courageous. You've come into a room, you've basically stripped yourself down, and you're taking what is normally the insides, our most vulnerable parts. These are the parts that if you were an animal and having to protect yourself, you would not show to the predator. So this is the stuff you protect yourself with. This is our armor, but this is turning yourself forward. And so you're taking what from the pelvis, the insides of the legs, you're turning the underbelly forward and you're putting that on the frontal plane. Wow. And you're making that normal. So turnout already is saying, I am available, I'm vulnerable, and I am exposing myself to you. So if you understand that and you turn yourself forward, you do that. Now, then you go to the biomechanical thing, and then you get the old school stuff of forcing that from the point of view of the joint capsule and the bone, whether or not it's appropriate to the person who is doing the rotation. So then you have to backtrack to what is actually available in the hip socket to you. Like for instance, the male hip socket is usually a deeper cup, and the femur going into that cup then has less mobility because it's a tighter pelvis. A female pelvis has usually, and depending on the dancer, a shallower cup that also makes us more vulnerable in terms of ligamental aspects of that, because we overstretch and we push the ligaments for what muscle should actually be doing. So in other words, we love pushing the edges of that mobility and that range of motion. But simple explanations of that is like, what is your actual pelvis? How wide is it? How wide is the hip socket? So when we're turning out, notice where your glass ceiling is. Notice where your edges are. Go to where the edges are, go as well as you can into that,